We'll just give everyone a couple minutes to start joining into the system, and we'll start very soon after that. So I'm going to kick things off today. I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar at, I'm about to say this morning. It's this morning for me, but it may not be this morning for everyone. I know for one of our wonderful panelists, it isn't. So try to get myself in that exclusive language. Welcome everyone to today. So this is our webinar for Global Accessibility Awareness Day that we're celebrating, which is number 14, and we're ahead of the game because when Jennison and Joe set up GAAD, it was on US time, and so they're about, I think, still 10 hours or 12 hours away before they officially start GAAD from their perspective, but we like to be future trendsetters here in Australia, and so we're ahead of the game from that perspective. So this is Intopia's webinar, and what we're going to be doing today is talking about deploying accessibility at scale, the strategy, tactics, and battle stories. Now, first, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, who am I? I'm Stewart Hay. I'm your host for today. I am one of the founders of Intopia, and the team like me to do this because it means I don't get to talk as much because I leave it to others to talk more, which is a good thing. I would like to mention that we are having AI media captioning us for us today. The wonderful Ashley is looking after us from that perspective. We have our Q&A function, so if you have any questions, please stick them into the Q&A session, and that's what we'll be using at the end, well, towards about midway through this session, when we'll open up to broader questions and answers from everybody. And finally, and I'm going through my wonderful little list here, this webinar is being recorded, and when it is finished and we've got it all cleaned up and made it accessible, it will be on the Intopia YouTube channel. So from that perspective, I'm going to move right into this. So I have the absolute pleasure to have Larene Gassick and Mary Roemmélé. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Mary, because I think I got that wrong. My apologies for that. Joining me today, and we're going to have a nice little powwow about the experiences that Larene and Mary have within their organizations for scaling digital accessibility and helping really grow that within any organization. So from that, I'm not going to go ahead and introduce them per se. I want each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a little about yourselves to our wonderful audience. So I'm going to throw first to Mary. Mary, can you give our wonderful audience a little bit more of a background of who you are and sort of what your role is at Workday?
Yeah, happy to. Lovely to be here with everybody. So my name is Mary Roemmélé, and I am the Director of Product Accessibility here at Workday, and I am based in San Francisco, California. And Workday, for those of you that are not aware, is a global Fortune 500 cloud-based enterprise software company that helps you basically at the end of the day manage your people and your money. And I'm delighted to be here and be on this panel with you both.
Thank you, Mary, and I'm going to be very embarrassed by the fact that how badly I got your last name wrong earlier.
That's all
But
right.
I
I
will
didn't
get it
put
right.
it up phonetically for you, so I'll make
No,
sure
I
and
will
do
get
that
it.
next time.
I'll get it better next time. And Larene, Larene, could you give a little bit of introduction to yourself for our wonderful audience?
Yes, thank you, Stuart. Hi, everyone. My name is Larene Gassick. I'm so happy to be here for Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Thank you for having me. I am what's known as the subgroup engineering lead for accessibility at Canva, but all that means is I support multiple accessibility teams. I do apologize, I didn't have the best sleep last night, so I'm not doing great with words today, which is perfect for a panel. So please forgive me if I do have trouble finding them. I've been working in accessibility since I started as a software engineer in 2015. I live in a lovely little town called in Australia called Harvey Bay. We're known for whale watching and retirement villages. And before Canva, I actually worked with Stewart in Intopia for a little while. I got into accessibility because growing up, my father was losing his vision and he's now completely blind. And so I've become very familiar with just about every assistive technology, familiar with related to low vision and blindness. And this personal connection helps me to drive my work here at Canva, where I lead the teams. And at Canva, I learned very quickly that technical and practical know-how in accessibility are essential, but not all you need to be able to effectively roll out accessibility at scale. So I'm excited to share what we've been doing as we've been growing and solving some really tricky problems.
Thank you very much, Larene, for that. So now that we know who our panelists are, I'm going to start with some questions. And so the objective here is I'm going to spend probably about another 20 or 30 minutes or so talking with Larene and Mary about some questions I'm pretty confident most people are interested in. And so we can better learn a little bit about what they've been doing and what their organizations have been doing around digital accessibility. We'll then throw it open to the panel through that question and answer feature, where if you've got any questions for them, we would love to hear them, and we would love to give Mary and Larene an opportunity to share anything, share their answers to your questions and insights from those questions that you may have. So I'm going to start with my first one, which is, what was the initial driver or catalyst for scaling accessibility in your organization? And I'm going to let Mary lead this one to start with.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. Workday, for full disclosure, certainly wasn't focused on accessibility from the beginning. And it was back in 2018 or thereabouts that we had a couple of customers get together and come to our technology lead at the time, Cheyenne, and say, you're really just simply not doing enough in this space. And so he took it seriously and went on site to one of those customers and invited the other customer up there with them and spent the day talking through what that meant for those customers. And at the end of that day, he walked away and decided that it was time for Workday to invest. So we had the two squeaky customers who are still squeaky customers, but they're great partners. They're part of our accessibility advisory council that we have, and we can talk a little bit about that as we go along here. But that's really what started it. Customers that were really interested in talking to Workday about their lack of accessibility. And so since then, since 2018, we've been focusing on it as a team.
Oh, that's great to hear, Mary. And I think it's always a really good driver when it's the customers that are pushing and pulling for those accessibility requirements. It definitely helps, I think, within those organizations to make those decisions around that. Larene, what do you think from your perspective, the same thing about that sort of, what was that catalyst for scaling accessibility at Canva?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wasn't around for when the I guess one of the triggers happened, but in a similar fashion to Workday, many years ago, I believe it was customers that let Canva know there was some accessibility gaps in the product. And so that triggered an audit and an accessibility tiger team to kind of start. This was around 5 years ago, and since then the accessibility team has grown quite a lot. We're actually 2 teams now, but also at the same time, one of the big drivers for Canva is Canva's mission is to empower the world to design, and so naturally accessibility is a very key part of that mission.
Oh, thank you, Larene. So I want to then move that on a little bit. So we're sort of in that realm of the strategy side of things and like what was those drivers. And the next question I want to add is it's a bit more around the goals and the business objectives. So like how are you aligning those, like the accessibility needs and the requirements within your organization to the overarching organizational goals and business objectives? So Larene, let's stay with you for this one. Like, how's that happening at Canva at the moment?
Yeah, one of the great things about Canva is that there is great buy-in and leadership buy-in for the importance of accessibility, not just from leadership, but also teams as well. A lot of people are very passionate about inclusion at Canva. And since I began about 2 years ago, accessibility has been a high priority and core company goal, or one of the company goals, which has been invaluable to be able to get the capacity and resourcing to be able to make progress and make change in accessibility. And another driver is, since accessibility is hugely important to enterprise and education, that that does help with communicating to stakeholders and working with across the different organizations, or we call them super groups across Canva, to help with planning and talk about all the different levers, like business, the business case, as well as just wanting to do the right thing as well. So yeah, it all comes down to the conversations.
Yeah, I think conversations are always, I mean, I think what a lot of us tend to find is that it's the conversations are important. Like, I mean, it's just as important to have the business artifacts in place around strategies and so forth. But a lot of times it's those conversations that happen within the teams and working closely with teams that helps bring that along, irrespective of what those objectives may say. Mary, what about yourself at Workday? Like what does it look like for Workday from that whole aligning accessibility to the broader business goals and objectives?
Yeah, well, just as Canva has business objectives, we also do, we call them strategic growth objectives, or SGOs. And they're pretty high level, as you can imagine. They cover a number of different areas, from, sales to kind of internal organization to sort of technology. And so we have those at high level at the top of the company. And so what we do is we align to those SGOs. And what we find makes us most successful, especially when we're having those internal conversations, is when we can put into those strategic growth objective language and conversation the work that we're doing to contribute to those. And so that's something that we've sort of evolved to over the years. Originally when we started, it was all about, hey, we're the accessibility team, this is what it's about. And now we've sort of matured into being able to talk about accessibility in the language of whoever we're talking to internally. And usually that goes very well when we can talk about that as it aligns to the SGO that we know that particular partner or group is focusing on. And so we try and make sure that we have pieces of work across every SGO in the company so that we can show where we fit in, where we meet them, where they are in their work.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear, Mary. And it has that sort of synergy with what Larene was mentioning. But again, you're sort of meeting people where they are at within the organization. You're connecting with them according to what their individual goals and needs and requirements are. And it's definitely something I've seen a lot from organizations as something that helps with the success of accessibility, where you're not sort of sitting just off to the side and being disconnected. It's really trying to get connected in with those teams.
Yeah, and you're much more successful, obviously, if you can sort of talk their language, but also so that they don't, so that they realize that you're not there as an additional thing, or, somehow or other they've got to sort of switch and pivot. If you can demonstrate where you fit into them and their work, then it's a much easier conversation.
Yeah. So this is, I've got a next question here, which actually lines up a little bit with this, but from an interesting context. So both of you have spoken about how you're really trying to stay connected with those teams and working with them. But governance hasn't quite come up necessarily as part of the question, part of that sort of role per se. And that becomes it's always been a tricky thing I've experienced with organizations about who applies the governance within an organization and whose role it is to enforce that governance in an organization. So I'm curious, I'll start with you, Mary. Like, what does governance look like within Workday for sort of achieving and meeting these accessibility requirements and goals?
Yeah, well, we've always taken the position that we don't lead with governance and compliance, or we don't lead with compliance, which many people think about when they think about governance. We lead with usability. And so you know, we have sort of the backbone of compliance that helps us have those conversations through our, you know, assessments that we do and the information that we bring back to the product teams to say, you know, this is what you need to work on and this is your progress. But we really tend to lead with usability in those conversations. Now, as it relates to sort of like making sure that they're doing what they need to do, again, we are on the theme of sort of meeting them in the flow. We tend to put into place systems and processes that are part of what they're already doing. So if that's a checklist, then it's part of their process. You know, it's part of the gating that's already in place. So it's not something sort of extra that they have to do or they have to step out of their work that they're doing. We have things like what we call snackable training that we do in the flow of their work, right? So it's not sort of a big training course or something that they have to step away and do. It's just kind of embedded there when they're doing it, and it's role based. So you know, we're really only feeding them things that are relevant to them and their role at the time that they should be thinking about accessibility.
Yeah, and I think that role-based training is really important in the sense that I've seen a lot of training which goes very generic, which is okay as an introductory, but people are they have their jobs to do. They have their responsibilities, they have their tasks, and what they're really interested in is like, what do I need to know to do
Mm-hmm.
to do my job? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, that sounds really good. I mean, I guess Larene, what about yourself at Canva? That sort of is there a more governance structure or is it more of a looser arrangement in place at Canva?
I would have to say it's definitely on the loose side. It's uh, been evolving over the years. I think when I joined Canva, we were at 3,000 people, and now we're at 5,000. Around half is the technology discipline, or mostly the engineers. So yeah, there are a few processes in play, but the goal is to, as Mary said, or you said, Stuart, to meet people where they're at and work with them and just be highly collaborative, making accessibility as easy as possible with the capacity that we have. We are working on formalizing and evolving as we go. But probably to surprise of no one, and Canva is a very fast-moving organization, and we value learning and experimenting and evolving quickly. But that also does come with the downside of things change all the time. Processes do quickly become out of date. But we are working on that as we evolve and mature as an organization. Right now, a lot of the support across Canva for accessibility does come out of the accessibility team. I believe we're chatting a little bit more about some tactics, which I'll share later. But we're a tight collaboration with legal and sales and product, and the people team as well. So yeah, we're constantly collaborating across our organizational streams, and we do so via leadership of each of the supergroups, and also sponsors and technical program managers as well, and
Oh,
product
thanks,
leads, everybody.
everybody. And we all know that, I mean, we all talk about this. The responsibility of accessibility really is everyone to a degree. I always preface that a little bit. There's to a degree, and I think personally, I think there's still a role for we need some of that accessibility leadership to help support that embracement by everybody. But we also know that if everyone embraces it, we get the biggest outcome, and the best outcome starts to come from that. So I'm going to move. So you both touched on this, and I think we've had a couple examples already, but I'm going to move a little bit from that top level strategy down to more of that operational tactical side of things. So at that tactical level, and I'll start with you, Lauren. I mean, we've touched on some ideas, but like beyond the governance, beyond the goals of within the organization, what are some of those sort of successful things you're seeing at that tactical level, at that individual and team level, that is helping progress and improve accessibility within Canva?
Yep. I think when I was writing down notes for this and looking through all the kind of key things that are really helping, anything that we do to make accessibility as easy and as clear as possible. That's collaborative and being realistic and working with the constraints of the people, the teams we're trying to help. And really the underlying thing is progress over perfection as well. Any kind of tactics that are very, very impactful or helpful generally do fall back to that. So one of the most useful ones we've found at the moment is office hours and having a dedicated support channel with a rotating roster. One of the big advantages of that, and this is actually a normal thing in many teams across Canva and many specialties. It eliminates the context switching of the accessibility team so that we can not just help people with our full attention, but we can also focus on our longer term goals as well to help progress kind of those really tough long-term challenges that we need to solve.
And I would guess that it also removes some of the friction within those teams about how do I quickly get answers because you've got someone on call ready to go to support them at any point they need to. So no, that sounds fascinating. So I guess, Mary, what about Workday? Like, what are those sort of, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about that sort of the training snap sort of solution there, which sounds great. But I mean, what else is Workday maybe doing to really operationalize it at a tactical level, the day-to-day side of things?
Yeah, similar themes to Larene, where we have dedicated Slack channels, where we have dedicated emailing that we can respond to. But one of the beauties of accessibility is that it is sort of pervasive and we very much think of ourselves as a horizontal servicing organization. And so, one of the more tactical things is that we make ourselves available again in those things that are already in place. So for an example of that is design reviews, right? So as far left in the life cycle as we can go, we're always sort of embedding ourselves in things that already exist. So in design reviews, they happen weekly. The teams can, bring their designs for review, and we're just one of the experts on that team and is available in the 2 hours that it's available there. And so that's sort of one of the tactical things. And just having our presence there, whether they have accessibility questions or not, it's sort of like a two-way thing. They can ask questions, but we also get like a little preview into what's coming and we can ask them questions as well, right? So they may not have thought that they had an accessibility challenge or something that, they should be looking at, but we get a little bit of insight there early in the process. And, as we know, as early as possible, in the cycle that you can start to have these conversations or work together, the cheaper it's going to be ultimately. So that's just one of the tactical things that we do. Again, making sure that we're not sort of something extra, that we're part of the process and embedded in the process and part of the DNA of how we build.
Yeah, and I think that's going to lead right into our next question, which is fantastic because it's all about how do we embed it into the day-to-day routine. And it's so like the old saying that culture eats strategy for lunch type situation where we can have the best objectives in place, we can have the best strategies in place, we can have, in a lot of occasions, the best intent in place from senior executives. If it's not happening at the day-to-day side of things, if it's not being embraced by the broader teams, it doesn't matter what everything else is. So to me, that leans into a lot, and I've always personally been a big believer that the shift for accessibility is a cultural challenge more than is a technical challenge, and how do we bring people along that journey to embrace accessibility as part of what they just do, irrespective of what the strategy is, irrespective of what the tactical requirements are. It's like, how do we get them to just embrace it as just the right thing to do without feeling like we're lecturing them? So I guess to do that, we hit those internal resistances with people. Like there are all these different cultural resistance around that, or the lack of awareness around those. So, how have both of you, and I'll stick with you, Mary, on this one. How have both of you basically dealt with that cultural challenge of bringing people along, building their awareness and getting them to embrace accessibility is just something they should be doing.
I think for us, it's less about embracing it because once they hear from us and they get to know the team and they understand it, it's a, to use an American term, it's a no-brainer to them, right? They get it. Um, the bigger thing for us is more often than not, we're coming across people that just haven't been exposed to it. Either they have not had a lived experience or they just don't know anybody that might need this type of technology assistance. And so we always spend time at the beginning just getting everybody on the same page before we make no assumptions about kind of what they're coming to the table with. And one of the things that we always use, which is super handy, it gets people sort of on the same page very quickly, is we love to use Microsoft's persona spectrum, the inclusive design, where they talk about permanent, temporary, and situational disability. And so even if they can't envision themselves, for example, with a permanent disability, they can pretty easily envision themselves with either a situational or a temporary disability. And that's where we get the aha moment. And once we've got that aha moment, then we've got them, right? They understand it. And then it's just a case of us then talking to them about kind of how they can build that into their process. But once we've got that aha moment, which again is through the awareness and education, then I feel like we don't really have any barriers. It just ultimately then becomes a case of what other business priorities are we competing with, right?
Hmm. And those other business priorities can be a challenge in itself to try to make sure that it's being considered at the same weight of those business challenges that are there.
Yeah, and that's where we're doing a lot of work to make sure that we are putting the work that we do in the language that makes sense to them. So what is the business ROI to them to have accessibility and included? How does it help the sales cycle? How does it help them, give the business case back to their senior managers or GMs to get the work done, right?
Yeah, and I think you've touched on a couple things there from what I like to think of as the influencer side of things from a culture. So you've mentioned some of that empathy side of things, connecting with people where they're at, trying to make them understand what it impacts. Well, empathy link, but then what does it mean to me? What's in it for me? That sort of this could be me at some point in the future. But then that business case side is sort of hits the people who are more what I'd call the number logical end of the spectrum as well. And I think that in itself is really important, I think, for everyone to understand is that even any workforce, just like everyone's society is very diverse, everyone has those different motivators. And it's part of our responsibility as the advocates within organizations to connect with everyone where they're at and what their motivator is. And there are different methods of connection, which you've gone through a couple of those, which is fantastic, Mary. Larene, throwing it over to you. I mean, are there other things that you've come across from Canva's perspective when it comes to that sort of shifting and adapting the culture side of things for accessibility?
Yeah, a lot of very similar themes to Mary. Of course, like once people know about accessibility, they generally can't unknow it and understand it. Once they understand it, they do care about it and understand its importance. So from that side of things, yeah, there is little resistance from like, yes, we care about this, it's important, we should do it. Um, I think something that we do, I think where the challenges come from is trying to solve problems they don't understand and can't test themselves and they can't validate themselves. So they're teams who don't have the specific accessibility knowledge are sometimes just guessing, and that can be quite frustrating. And so that's why there is a big focus on how do we very, very clearly demonstrate and share what the recommendations or solutions are from the accessibility team side of things. I do want to shout out that the accessibility team is very luckily not the only team that has good knowledge about accessibility. There's a sprinkling of champions throughout Canva, and also a big shout out to the design system or easel team subgroup as well, who have done an incredible job on accessibility in our design system. One, I guess, to share an example, one thing we do is to check with real users as much as possible. We partner a lot with Intopia, but we also partner with a company called Fable, and we validate anything that might feel like theoretical or guesswork. An example is color contrast, is one we've done recently, and we're always like, yeah, 3 to 1, 4.5 to 1, but it's like, oh, is that, where do these numbers come from? How does it impact people? Does it really impact people? And so, yeah, we test them with real low vision users to just see, like, what is something that's easier to see? What are the different needs from low vision users who all have different needs, and being able to share that back and share back the impact of what we're trying to fix before and after has been something that we try to do as much as possible, just to show rather than to leave it up to guesswork and kind of trying to meet a theoretical spec.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well, because we touched on like the different motivators and empathy being one, but empathy, as we know, can turn into pity or sympathy for some people, and we're trying to always avoid that. And having people actually see firsthand real world people, real experiences, it moves it beyond just someone's just talking about it and talking about it as being an issue for somebody, but when you actually see it happening, it becomes more real for a lot of people in an organization, which is, I think, such an important thing. Now, there's a question that's come in from our audience, and it sort of is in line with this question, and I'm just going to tweak an element of it, which is basically, if you're willing to share or want to share or believe there is an answer to this, is it any particular group or role within an organization that is more challenging maybe to convince to embrace accessibility than others? So is there any standout group that tends to be a little more the harder group to sort of bring over and convince to accessibility? I can see both of you looking a little bit, thinking about that. It's almost like a hold music, but maybe Mary, I might throw it back to you for that one first, see if
Yeah.
there's any particular group.
I actually have an example from this week, actually, so it's a great question. So we're always finding new people to have conversations with, excuse me, new groups. And one of those groups that we knew that we needed to spend a little bit more time with, just simply because we hadn't been able to really kind of get into the details with them, is a group called, well, they basically implement Workday to our new customers. And that could be by using third-party consulting firms to do that, or we have our own arm of that as well. Now, if you think about that, that's the group that takes the customer from prospect, well, takes the prospect to the customer status, meaning that they've signed the contract, they're ready to implement Workday. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of work in implementation after the contract signed now, like how on earth do you implement it, right? And what does that prospect site look like? And how do we, move them from whatever tooling or processor they have to now using Workday? And so as we were talking to them this week and doing our what we call our dog and pony show to tell them all about accessibility and let's get excited and we're going to be great partners, they had some very direct questions on, well, how much time should we be spending on this? And this should be in the statement of work. And how many minutes in the contract should we be talking about accessibility? And I was like, oh, this is a whole different sort of lens and language that's very contractual in nature. But of course, as we step back and thought about it, it's because we're using third parties and ourselves, and it's a very sort of time box contractual thing that has to be done, right? That's got penalties or otherwise in it if you miss deadlines and all this kind of good stuff, right? And so it's not that they were difficult to work with in any way. It was just a different lens. Usually you're sort of talking to somebody, introducing accessibility, when they have their aha moment, then we sort of, take hands and walk off into the sunset together and we're BFFs forevermore, right? But this was sort of a different sort of beast a little bit, where we had to really, again, going back to sort of putting it in their language and how they manage themselves, we had to sort of both acknowledge that we now understood one another, but we had to go back and think about how to put our requests of them in their language and in their process. And they also had to think about, how to consume us, right? And the reason that we wanted to sort of begin that partnership and conversation is because we're very embedded in the pre-sales sales conversation. And we are told that we're very much a differentiator when accessibility is in that conversation with our prospects. But then it's almost like we go radio silent until they're a customer. But there's this big sort of space in the middle where, it gets implemented. And that could be, as quick as 3 months, although it's never that quick, right? But it could be up to a year before Workday is actually implemented with our customer sites. And so we knew this was an area that we wanted to make sure there was sort of ongoing conversation. So sort of a long way of saying that they're not necessarily more challenging, but it was just very different. It was like a new conversation that we had to have. I mean, challenging, I don't know if we have anybody that's super challenging. Obviously, developers are, focusing on lots of things, including accessibility. And I think it's just an ongoing conversation where we have a lot of support from sales, legal, those sorts of groups, because, there's something sort of solid behind that, right? There's compliance items, there's the conversation to sell. But anyway, hopefully
I
that
think
gives
I
you a
think
little
that
bit.
Yeah, and I think there's two amazing little insights there that you've touched on, Mary. And one is obviously Workday is viewed digital accessibility as a positive differentiator to selling your product to the
Mm-hmm.
market. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really important because it gives that ability for organizations to embrace it as a solution. Um,
Yeah. And I would
but
actually just sort of add a little bit of nuance there also. It's more than just sort of the accessibility being part of the conversation. What really is the differentiator is if we have somebody live, myself or somebody else from the team in there, and they're able to answer the questions directly, and they're able to do the demo and just bring, the system up. It really makes a huge difference. And what we've found is that if we can have that conversation with the prospect, then, then later it's a much better partnership, even when there's, challenges in that part, as any relationship can have its challenges along the way, um, then it's much, much better.
and there was another element there which you're touching into as well, which we as a community have this tendency to, I think, lean on two arguments for promoting accessibility. And one is it's a human right, and the other one is you're going to get sued and it's a legal issue. And it's not necessarily saying we're not debating it's a human right, but I think from a pragmatic perspective within most organizations, for us as I think the advocates for digital accessibility, we've got to remember, and I think this is the experience you're both sharing, which is just you can't approach this as just slapping a card on the table going, it's a human right, and everyone's just going to jump in and just embrace it. It's meeting everyone where they're at, meeting them based on the language they're using, based on the information they need, based on the requirements that they're trying to work towards, and meeting them at where their locations are as an accessibility advocate to help them achieve what they need to achieve while also hopefully embracing digital accessibility and embracing it as part of something they need to do. And I think as a community, we tend to forget that a lot, or we misunderstand that we still need to work for this. We need to put that effort in to connect with these different groups and meet them where they're at to help them come to the well of accessibility in a sense.
Yeah, we hardly ever lead with the compliance side. I feel like that's the last resort, right? If we're
Mm.
having to say, but it's in the contract, or, we're going to get sued, then we've missed the boat on the conversation, right?
Uh,
Yeah.
I agree. and I fully with that. And I see, Larene, you're nodding your head there as well. So I guess from your perspective, I guess go back to the original point, because I know Mary had an amazing little sort of insight there from a Workday perspective. But are there any particular groups? I know you've got some amazing champions across Canva who are championing accessibility. And we see that a lot from what I would call organizations who are early in their journey towards really embracing accessibility across the whole organization. But are there any particular areas that you've encountered that tend to be a little bit more trickier, need a little bit more effort to bring across to the well of accessibility?
I don't think that we can put it to a particular group or role, I guess, if I know there's a bit of a spicy question. That's what we were looking for. I mean, they're like everybody is different and has different motivations, constraints, and so we do face sometimes challenging conversations. But I can't say. Mary's sharing the story remind me of we um, we we've met people where they're at in terms of like developers, designers, speak their language. It reminded me of when we're speaking with the sales team. Like we can explain with CAG and accessibility to designers and developers, but explaining policy and legislation, which is even more complicated than just WCAG, and all the different laws and all the different things that are coming into effect of all the different deadlines. That was definitely a lot of information and was a challenge and kind of prompted us to also start a dedicated like channel for sales questions because they were getting a lot more questions from customers. So we thought we'd put it all together and help to try and scale our responses a little bit more and make sure that sales are set up for success and feel confident when they're answering these questions because they are tricky.
Well, and I'm chuckling because our sales team are more than happy for us to take that as that piece of the RFP and actually answer those questions, which we want, right? I'd rather have us answering that as part of the RFP process rather than them because they can go a little cowboyish a little bit on the answers, right? So, we don't want them to verbally or contractually commit to things that we don't want to do, but yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you, for that. Now, I've got my last question. We've got a couple from the audience, but one of the audience has a question that aligns with this last question for me, which is measuring accessibility success within your organization. So can you describe to me maybe a little bit about how you're measuring the success of accessibility within each of your organizations? And Larene, I'll start with you on this one.
Yep. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, a lot of things are evolving, and so we're trying different things. We have recently done one of the largest audits ever at Canva, and so the metrics from that obviously are a number of accessibility issues so quantitative metrics like that. We have been working with Fable on user testing for a bit over a year and a half now, and they have something called a accessibility usability score or metric, and so we like to use that. Obviously, it's not the only thing we look at, but we like to use that as a key indicator of how well a task or how accessible or usable a task is for various folks. And we are currently working with one of our analytics or data science teams to work out how do we get product quality metrics around accessibility into kind of our dashboard. And we have lots of Jira dashboards around accessibility as well. And we also have data from customer support and sales calls as well. So those are just some of the ones off the top of my head. We have quite a few that we look at.
Oh, thank you for that, Larene. I'm gonna let Mary, yeah, throw over to you. So what's it looking like at Workday from that sort of measuring, like how do you know you're being successful from all this accessibility effort?
Yeah, very similar things. One thing that we're trying to do though is uh, think very strategically about this. So one of the things that we're challenging ourselves to do this year is think about the metrics that we're doing and look at them fairly critically to make sure that we are not encouraging unintended consequences. So, an example of that is instead of, looking at how many bugs we close, we want to be looking at how many bugs are fixed, so that we are making sure that we're encouraging the right behaviors. Lots of different metrics we're also exploring. So, for example, in the sales space, we're taking a look at how we can demonstrate business value around something called ACR, which is annual contract value or revenue. So if we can tie the work that we're doing to that dollar number, then we can show our return on investment of our team and how we're contributing. So, we're exploring some what I'm going to call non-traditional accessibility metrics, but helps with making sure that we're showing our team return on investment and the amount of time that we're spending doing this type of work. Other things that we're looking at is, when we're looking at, we have I think, Larene, you mentioned a champions program. We have something similar, right? So when we're looking at that, we're looking at, how many people are engaging with us, and then not just sort of engaging, but how many times have they engaged other people, whether it's their Scrum teams or their teams around them in the conversation around accessibility. So we're trying to go beyond the sort of standard developer metrics, if you will, and try and expand into other spaces to see how we can show value.
Oh, really interesting. Now, I've got a couple questions from our wonderful audience, and I want to touch on them. And they're probing a little bit some of the responses so far, which is good. We love that. One of which is obviously there's been mention a little bit about the sort of low vision users, and the question is more around what are you doing for both organizations, both of you? So each of you, I'll throw it to you. What are you doing to focus on other accessibility domains as part of your product strategy? So, I mean, we know we tend to highlight blind low vision users as being the sort of primary user base that we're trying to support. But what else are you doing to go beyond that user group in particular? Mary, I might start with you for that question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So we have really started to focus on being able to use research and do research studies or do DPGs, design partner groups. And so, Lauren, you mentioned Fable, or we've used them also in the past to make sure that we're sort of not only making sure that we're using people with disabilities, but also getting that spread and variety, if you will. So we're trying to be very conscious in that space. It's very easy to slip into the kind of screen reader, low vision sort of persona, but we're also looking at personas and making sure that we are thinking about those personas. And as we're doing our training, we're talking about many different types of personas, right? So that we're expanding people's knowledge in that space.
Yeah, and I think it's really it can be difficult for some organizations where they go, oh, we just want to add a new persona, a single new persona that is just disability, and forgetting that, well, that persona is actually representative of a very diverse group of needs and preferences out there, and needing to recognize and understand that it's not as traditional as just going, well, we need someone who's, say, under 18 years of age and the work from home mother or father, or whatever these sort of traditional marketing style personas are of customers, versus disability is actually a layer, another metrics layer across all of that. So yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear. Larene, what about yourself from your perspective? Like how are you focusing on going beyond the most obvious disability requirement we tend to seem to focus on at times?
Yeah, I chuckle a little bit because I often get this question and from my team is like, stop just caring about screen reader users because you're dad. It's not true. Um, so yeah, I think probably just from the coincidental from the examples today, we talk a lot about low vision and screen reader users. Canva, for those who don't know, Canva is a very visual platform. It's a design and productivity tool. So we do, and especially top of mind currently, we do think about how low vision and non-visual access works because that's one of the trickiest things trickiest problems that we are trying to solve at Canva. But we care very deeply about the diverse range of different ways that people navigate, use, consume digital experiences in general. I know we care very deeply about neuro inclusion. There's been a lot of focus on that. And with Fable, we do try to test with as many cohorts, groups who use different assistive technologies as much as possible, not just screen readers. We do try to keep quite a spread. Yeah, we do have to check ourselves sometimes if we are kind of going too much in the one focus, but overall we don't just focus on screen reader users and low vision, but it is it's one of the tougher challenges just because we are a visual platform.
And I think this is maybe to summarize for our audience, it's like we tend to use certain groups as more the focal group because more often not when we're trying to work with people or convince people, we've got that 20-second elevator pitch to bring people along to the idea. And there are definitely some groups in the disability community which are more easier to describe for audiences when we're pitching things. But as you both explained, it doesn't mean you're limiting your efforts to that group. It's just they tend to be a better one to use sometimes for pitching and communicating needs and preferences to then lead into the broader discussion around the broader requirements that are out there across the disability community, which is fantastic to hear from both your organizations. Now, I've got another question here, which is an important one from both, I think, your organizations being software development organizations. And the question's more around how do you approach accessibility being perceived as a threat to sprint velocity and slowing teams down from releasing updates? Now, I hear this a lot from organizations I talk with through our software development companies, where obviously a lot of the focus is getting new features out there, getting features updated, getting improvements out there, and that velocity is a big sort of requirement within those organizations. And there's always this challenge then of how does accessibility fit within that velocity and not get perceived as being a barrier to the velocity or slowing down the velocity. So how have both of you found that? And Larene, I might start with you on that one. How are you finding that from within the Canva environment of that perception that accessibility might slow down that velocity of release?
It's a good question, and it is one of the toughest challenges because depending on where a team is at or where a person is at in their accessibility journey, yes, it is going to take longer to do something accessibly because you're going to need to get recommendations from the accessibility team and then get it checked and go back and forth and stuff like that. It is, but it's important to invest in the systems to decrease that over time, and it's important to make that investment during the time, but also be pragmatic and realistic and work with the teams to strike up a balance. I think while we work on the root cause and work on making the systems and culture improve and the maturity improve to allow them to do that faster.
Oh, thank you, Larene. Mary, how about yourself over at Workday? Have you experienced this over there?
So the analogy that I'm going to use is sort of a little gory, but what I like to say is that we like to work with the teams when they have the patient open, right? So when they're already working in that space, we are ready to go with things, accessibility things that are sort of on that feature or in that that piece of code. So what we typically do is, as we're creating our JIRAs or our bugs, we are making sure that we're getting all the labels that we need to put on there so that when my accessibility product manager knows that they're working on particular features that they're already working on it. There's no excuse. Here's the accessibility things. Let's just sort of roll that into the works. So that's the approach that we try and do more often than not, so that we're not necessarily asking them to go off and work on something that, feels like it's extra work to them, right? So, we're addressing accessibility from the design perspective. So if there's anything net new, but if they're going back and retrofitting or working on a feature because they're already got plans on the roadmap, then we make sure that they know all of the accessibility pieces that are in that space as well. And so we don't tend to get a lot of that type of pushback because they're already working in that space.
No, that's good to hear. I mean, I know it is a challenge, and I know obviously, yeah, a lot of software development companies that they live and thrive on the release cycle. So no, I'm glad to hear that both of you are finding that you're able to work within that environment as well.
Well, and a big part of it, just to sort of like finish my thought there, is that we spend a lot of time making sure that we understand what their roadmaps are, right? What the different product area roadmaps are so that we can anticipate. So the model that I have in my team is that I have what we call accessibility product managers, and they're aligned to product areas or product SKUs, how we sell the product. And so while they sit on my team, they're very much sort of embedded with that product area. So they know what they're working on, they know what's on the roadmap. And so they can tee up the accessibility work that we know in that space as it comes up.
And I think that's another good example to what we were talking earlier about meeting the teams where they're at, having someone
Hmm.
who's in a sense pseudo embedded or pseudo sort of
Hmm.
focused on them, which is not too different to old school sales, where you'd have a salesperson whose job was to look after government clients or
Hmm.
to look after health industry. You've sort of done the same thing. You got your accessibility experts geared to your different product teams internally,
Hmm.
and are learning constantly about what their needs are and their requirements are. Or at least this is what it sounds like, learning about their
Yep,
needs and requirements are and being able to feed into that in a timely fashion.
that's right. Yep.
Excellent. Well, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to wrap up our questions and answers there. We've pretty well answered all the questions that came through. One or two that we haven't got to, but I think we've done a pretty good job of getting around to all of that. There's two little messages I'm going to leave with, which is, first of all, this recording will eventually be on the Intopia YouTube channel. So if you want to pay attention and stay up to date with this stuff, definitely join our either subscribe to the Intopia YouTube channel or subscribe to our newsletter so we can keep you informed and up to date. We try not to sort of spam anybody with those sort of materials. It's all about trying to keep people informed and everything. I also want to sort of give a bit of an announcement. I know we're about to launch it. It's not quite, I think, out there just yet, but we know that this sort of assessing and understanding the maturity of an organization is a pretty important one. We've been doing a lot of that work to help and support organizations around just doing that sort of maturity assessment gap analysis work. And one of the things we are, as part of what we call GAAD Week, because GAAD has moved beyond just being a day, and to try to avoid so much noise on one day, we really want to have this spread out. And I know we're not the only organization doing this. Many others are really going into GAAD Week and sometimes GAAD Month, which is fantastic. It spreads out more the advocacy and the communications around the importance of accessibility. But one thing we are about to release is a sort of a self-service maturity model for organizations, where you can jump on there and basically answer a range of different questions and get yourself a nice little simple report about where you are from maturity stage, but then some simple hints and suggestions of how you can improve where you are in your maturity sort of journey. And I think, like with everything else, one thing we've always tried to work with all organizations from an Intopia perspective is that everyone starts at a different point on the journey, and everyone sort of takes their speed along that journey at different sort of paces. And we should never really shame any organization for where they're starting or how fast they're going along that journey. Really, what we always want to do is try to encourage every organization to, no matter where you start, encourage and support them to progress along their journey. And ideally, I find that anytime we can build momentum up in any organization around digital accessibility, momentum is a very powerful thing. And once you start getting momentum, it's very hard to sort of break off from that. So thank you, Larene. Thank you, Mary, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone who's joined us in our audience today as well. We will leave you to the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and we'll catch you all next time.
Thank you so much.